Please welcome the Vice President of Innovation and Chief Technology Officer for Vancouver Airport Authority, Lynette DuJohn, and the Vice President of Environmental Affairs for Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport, Robert Horton, in conversation with Skift Senior Travel Tech Editor, Sean O'Neill.
Hello. We talk today about airport innovation with two stars from the sector, Lynette and Robert. We wanted to make sure when putting this panel together that we were representing YVR and DFW, because let's face it, most cities in North America are not in love with their hometown airports. But that is an exception in Vancouver, where people have a fierce pride in YVR, and residents of Dallas and Fort Worth are very proud of DFW too. So we'll start now with Yvette in Vancouver. Thank you for joining us today. We're very grateful.
Hi, everyone. I'm Lynette DuJohn. I'm from the Vancouver International Airport. I am the VP of Innovation and Chief Technology Officer, and I'm super excited to be here today. I know Tamara, our new CEO, was supposed to be here, so she sends her apologies. But she had some other business she had to do, so I'm stepping in for her.
Thank you very much, Lynette. And we'll get to you, Robert, in a moment. But with Lynette, let's start first. How has digital innovation been impacted by the crisis? Is it on life support right now? Is it in a coma, digital innovation at YVR?
No, it's the lifeblood of where we're going in the future. It's been really interesting. The pandemic has impacted so many industries in different ways. And we all know that tech is shining right now. And there's just lots of opportunities. And we see that at YVR, even though our passenger numbers are down and there's been significant impact on our revenue and our business, we really do see the way through COVID is by leveraging technology and innovation. So it's actually kind of an exciting time for us here in Vancouver.
Well, let's build on that. Give us some examples of some of the digital innovation that you're working on now.
Well, it's interesting. We're a little bit different model up here in Canada than other countries. We're a community-based, not-for-profit organization, and that word community-based is super important to us. And when we look at the economy of our region, it's really changing because of the pandemic. And so we've always been an economic generator of the local business community, but the business community is completely changing. And so one of the things that we did back in September is we started talking to our local businesses in a completely different way. We started talking to what are those new and emerging industries that are coming out of Vancouver. So we have a really big startup community. There's a lot of innovation that happens in this community. So typically we used to be a region that was driven by forestry, mining, and tourism. And now what you're seeing is there's biotech, there's agri-tech, there's clean tech companies. And what do they need from an airport going forward? And so we hosted a bunch of leaders from this region and talked to them about what do you need? And they came back with, they didn't talk about, we need more planes or we need routes to here. What they talked about is how they need more data and they need more innovation from us as an airport. How can we play a different role in logistics and cargo and helping them get their product to market differently? So it's been really interesting to see how the business community has embraced this whole concept of how we want to play a different role or an expanded role in our region and how we can really support them.
All right, thank you, Lynette. So, Robert, to turn to you, you've been at DFW for more than 6 years now, leading up the environmental and sustainability efforts there. And to give some context for our attendees, I mean, DFW is the third largest airport in the world, but you're leading in the Americas on sustainability and environmental issues. You've gotten a lot of accolades. So what is an example of something you're particularly proud of in the team's work there at DFW in recent years?
So I would say that prior to COVID, we had done so much work. We became the first carbon neutral airport back in 2016. And what that was, it allowed us to celebrate 2 decades of investments in energy efficiency initiatives, which allowed us to reduce costs, but also our emissions. Since 2010, we've reduced our emissions by more than 80%. while reducing our energy costs by more than 30%. So all of those work together to really allow us to benchmark or to compare efficiency with improved environmental performance. And that was really at the heart of all the work we do. Conservation efficiency does translate into better business performance as well as lower environmental impact. And under this pandemic, that's become even more clear that there's a need to preserve and conserve capital so that because with the uncertain future, having that capital available for priorities that are changing almost daily becomes important. We heard Sean, our CEO, speak earlier today about how much money we're spending on cleaning and disinfecting. And those are priorities that we did not think were in existence a year ago. So I think the work that we do in sustainability, which is linked to being a good and responsible community asset, as well as driving improved business performance, is becoming a priority and a business imperative right now.
So yeah, you were referring to, your boss, Sean Donahue, was talking earlier with the head of American Airlines, president of American Airlines, Robert Ipsum. And to your point there, you were just talking about right now with this revenue crisis, airports have to make some tough decisions. What would be your advice to your counterparts about what they should ring fence or prioritize in environmental and sustainability issues despite the crisis in order to come out strong?
Well, I would say that there are a few areas that I would encourage all of our colleagues across the world to prioritize. First is, while we have, there are several disruptions that can impact an airport. And an airport is really critical because we're the ones that can connect our regions to global and domestic concerns, right? And so I would say, first of all, is to study and understand the significant disruptors that impact our ability to function and provide services to our regions. I would say things like climate change. We can't afford to continue ignoring those impacts, because if we think about extreme weather, last October, we had a very significant tornado event that was listed as the costliest in Texas history, $1.6 billion. It also caused $17 million of damage at our airport. And so you can't ignore the impacts that we're seeing daily. Continue studying the global trends that disrupt us. The second is invest in energy efficiency, because having the ability to control how and when you use energy as our dependence on energy is increasing is extremely important. And then the other part is from a human perspective, a social responsibility perspective. We have to ensure that our indoor environment are very protected, healthy indoor environment, because as we're looking at the recovery process, everyone is so keenly focused on restoring consumer trust by creating these healthy and safe environments. And of course, over the years, we've shown an inextricable link between the built environment and human health. So those are key focus areas that we recommend investing in.
Okay, thank you, Robert. So Lynette, when you are looking at cargo, what are you doing at YVR that's sort of interesting about cargo? Because that is a theme that has bubbled up today at Skift Aviation Forum. Many parts of the airlines and airports are trying to take advantage of it.
Yes, of course. I mean, we all know that we were pretty dependent on our passengers, as our revenue model wasn't all that diverse. So cargo is something that we all are looking at as airports. But we think that there's opportunities to play a different role in the cargo space. So when you think about, like right now, there's flights coming in with belly cargo in them, and then you have your customs agents that have no idea when those flights are coming in, what is in those in that cargo, and then they get there, they open up the box and they're looking through, oh, look at that, isn't that interesting? And they check it out, and then meanwhile there's a truck waiting to move that somewhere, and they don't know when it's going to be available, what's in it, and how they have to move it around. So when you think about the amount of waste, and to Robert's point around being sustainable, the amount of paper that's moved around, the manual work, I really believe that there's a different role that airports can play in as a hub to be able to move that information around and make it a much more efficient and ultimately sustainable process. So logistics and cargo, we see a tremendous amount of opportunity in that space.
So a theme I'm hearing in the answers you've given so far, Lynette, is that, data is such an important resource for an airport today. But, you have, when collecting that data, whether it's how passengers shop or how they flow, or as you're saying, like how the cargo happens on the airport grounds, all that data may be collected by different stakeholders. And you mentioned your community model earlier. How do you resolve that tension over who owns the data and how you share the data between each other?
Well, I honestly think we all just have to get over it. There's and it has to be win-win for all parties. So being able to set a vision of why we're trying to achieve and why it's important to share that data. I think that's the first thing. Like people will move when they see that there is a reason to make a change. And the sustainability is going to be really important as we go forward. So bringing everyone along. And I always say with innovation, ideas are great, they're wonderful, but they're also a dime a dozen. So how do we put as much effort into getting a community of people to start using these innovations and ideas? And that's where I see where we have to put as much thought and energy into innovating of how people adopt this and how will they share their data, and how do we set it up so that it's not commercially sensitive data that is moved around, because there is some real concerns about opening up all of the data. So it's just going to be, working and I always say there's some grinding in the trenches, right? That we have to be able to make sure that we're getting this done correctly. So
great. We have some poll results from our poll earlier, so about how much the pandemic will set back digital and environmental goals, and it looks like people chose the most optimistic answer, that the largest owners will stay pretty much on course on digital innovation and the environment, but there may be delays for the rest, and the other options had been much more farther out delays and setbacks. So Lynette, you've said that you believe that this has been an optimistic time. Robert, how about for you, for environmental sustainability beyond DFW, looking at airports worldwide? How big of a setback do you think this crisis is?
I think the entire crisis has caused us to pause and look at our businesses differently. And that's important because Lynette hit on a couple of key points there. With the advances in data and science and the ability to understand trends a lot better, we're able to understand a lot more of how our past behavior has affected our world and our environment. And we're able to learn from that and become better as we move into the future. And so what we have seen at DFW, and I think a lot of people around the world, a lot of my colleagues have spoken about, is they've seen their sustainability agendas actually become elevated as a priority in their businesses, because it's what provides resilience, it provides flexibility, it provides a lot of purpose and enhancing of our brand. When you elevate these missions of protecting people and protecting the environment as a strategic priority. So, I just see the trends evolving to have us press pause, but then try to become better as we go into the future. And I don't think that, I've seen a lot of focus on today's issues, today's crises, but I see a lot more of looking forward, future-proofing of what we're doing because of the potential disruptions that can happen from just about anything.
So you mentioned looking into the past in order to be able to predict from the future, and picking a bit up on Lynette's point. A lot of times people talk about digital innovation and they think about it as in one bucket and environment and sustainability in another bucket. But at DFW, you've sort of used digital innovation to try to be able to be smarter in how you plan and manage the environment. So tell our attendees about that.
So from a sustainability perspective, a lot of what we've tried to emphasize is that we live in a very interconnected ecosystem where some of the actions that we do has an impact on others all the time. And so where digital provided an advantage, we have a collaboration with the National Renewable Energy Lab and Oak Ridge National Laboratory, in which they were able to reconstruct our operating model. So they were able to replicate virtually the way that people and freight move to and from the airport. And by reconstructing that model, we were able to understand some of the patterns and tendencies that created conflict or congestion as we saw it. For example, one of the things we studied is prior to the pandemic, our buses would our on-campus buses would circumnavigate the globe every 18 hours with an average ridership of 20%. And so we were able to study those patterns and understand where are the opportunities to optimize and make those more productive routes. So but once they constructed that model, they explored 21 million scenarios.
21 million scenarios.
Yeah, imagine us doing that manually, right? So they explored 21 million scenarios and came up with several optimization strategies that could reduce our operating cost by anywhere from 20 to 50%. So these are really key benefits that we see from using a digital twin approach to studying and learning from your history and then making better decisions in the future.
All right.
And the other thing I would say to link it with sustainability, because we live in this interconnected world, we try to apply a concept we call systems thinking. So think as a system instead of an individual silo. And that's what the model enables us to do, to think like a system.
That's fantastic. And I think that picks up on Lynette's point about sort of having a community model as an approach going forward a bit. Right. So Lynette, one of the things that you've sort of done is sort of analyze the business operations and efficiencies at YVR using data, applying data sophisticated with different kinds of analytics. Can you talk a little bit to that point?
Well, when I love what Robert just showed, because that's one of the things that we are also looking at is how to leverage digital twinning and being able to do those analytics in the way that we've never been able to do. We're doing a lot of work with testing and new COVID requirements. And when you think about the number of variables that nobody knows. So, when you look at the future, like, okay, so passenger flows are going to be impacted by social distancing. Right? What kind of passenger volumes are we talking about? How are they going to do testing? Are they going to do testing at the airport? Is it departure testing? Is it arrivals testing? What about vaccination? How is all of that going to fit together? And so being able to run models and understand that data at hyperspeed is going to be very, very important for us to figure out how this evolves. That the idea of static modeling and only understanding and being able to do 3 scenarios, those days are gone. We just need to understand at a much deeper level.
And what is YVR's take on testing for the coronavirus at the airport? Because we've heard a debate today at Skift Aviation Forum. Ryanair's Eddie Wilson, the CEO, said he thought that it wasn't worth airports' time, whereas executives from Air France and American Airlines thought that it was. What's your view?
Well, because we're community-based, the big thing that we want to make sure when it comes to testing is that we're not taking away from community testing that needs to happen. The health and safety of our population is first and foremost to the Vancouver Airport. So we don't want to take any capacity away from the public capabilities. So I think it becomes important for us in Canada to play a role in testing, whatever that looks like. So we are looking at, we have a test that pilot's going on with WestJet, and it's also in partnership with the University of British Columbia, so that we can take a science-based approach to what kind of testing will work. And testing hasn't been as available in Canada as it has been in the US, from my understanding, because we haven't had as many antigen tests approved up here in Canada. So we believe that there is a role. And what we're trying to figure out during this pilot is not only which tests will work and what the science is behind it, but the operational impact of it. So how will passengers move through the terminal if there is a testing requirement? Now, ultimately, there's the vaccine. So again, when you talk about those variables, will that be a short-term requirement? How long will that be in place? When vaccines come forward, is there a role for airports to play? I don't think anyone would, want to bet on any of those scenarios. So just being prepared for all the different ones, I think, is the way to go for airports, because we just don't know how this is going to play out.
And Sean, can I weigh in on that? I'd like to challenge the thinking a bit, because I heard some of the discourse earlier today, and one of the things that jumped out to me is when you have a pandemic like this that starts in one area and quickly spreads across the world, what was the role of transportation in accelerating that spread? And so as ports which receive people from all over the world, if we don't develop an ability to detect these threats and contain them instead of being an enabler to the spread, I don't think we would be any better than we were a year ago. So I think it's critically important that we develop the ability to detect trends that will come into our port and be able to contain them instead of contributing to the spread.
That makes excellent sense. And I guess to follow up a bit on environmental and sustainability, coming out of this crisis, like the aviation industry, airports have a lot of practices that frankly are bad, and maybe they're outdated. Is there anything that you sort of see as being jettisoned permanently as a result of this crisis, maybe a small silver lining that might accelerate on sustainability in the environment?
I think I alluded to it earlier, and I hope this registers with people and they make the connection to this. Energy efficiency, a focus on energy efficiency is even more critical. When I look at things like our dependence on energy, we see all these auto manufacturers converting to electric vehicles. We see digital innovation being expanded. So our dependence on the data from these critical digital tools is becoming even more and more heightened. So not being able to protect your energy systems so that they're the lifeblood to your operations, you cannot afford to ignore that. So energy efficiency, managing your cost, making sure that you have clean, reliable energy supply, very critical. And then having control and flexibility over how and when you use energy. Those are priorities that I believe are critically important. The other is something that's been discussed in the industry for many years now, and hopefully people do not make short-term decisions when they talk about investing in sustainability priorities or initiatives such as indoor air quality. Indoor air quality is not a new concept or a new focus, but we've learned over the years at the airport, we started focusing on mold and asbestos, and then realized that there were several other things entering our spaces. And so there was a need to develop a more comprehensive approach to creating a healthy indoor environment, which we spoke about earlier today, is key in the recovery effort. So I don't think you can afford to ignore those practices of short-term thinking. You have to think about some of the significant initiatives that can really enable you to transform and become resilient.
Okay, so energy efficiency and maintaining sort of purity in the airport environment, or being able to control what's going on in the airport
Absolutely.
environment. So Lynette, one thing that you and Robert have in common is you both came from outside the airports as a sector. When you were in this job, Lynette, you were previously at BCLC in the gaming sector. I'm wondering, did that give you any sort of disadvantage in order to being able to sort of tackle the challenges?
Yeah, it was very interesting. I've been with the airport for just over 4 years now, and when I was within the gaming industry, the industry is based on technology. There is no lottery product without technology, so it was core to everything we did. And so coming into YVR, I am a civil engineer, so I love construction. That's how I started my career. But the amount of energy and effort that the industry was putting into construction and building and more building, and understandably, our whole industry was in massive growth mode. And so when you're focused so much on one thing, it's really easy not to put as much energy into something else. The interesting thing is construction and new build is way more expensive than digital initiatives. So, I think a lot of us in the industry are going, oh, if we had to just put a little bit more money into digital in the past, we probably would be further ahead right now. So I'm on my soapbox a little bit right now. But the good thing is, as we come out of COVID, these kinds of initiatives, they don't cost as much as trying to build new capacity. So I think that is important, and that was the big thing I really noticed when I came into this industry, is how technology was kind of off to the side, and construction was the major focus of the industry.
Thanks, Lynette. And Robert, this is my last question also for you. Like, did this put you at a disadvantage coming more than 6.5 years ago now, but from outside the sector?
I actually thought it gave a very strong advantage, similar to Lynette. My background, I have an agricultural and biological engineering degree, but also I'm a licensed civil engineer. And so engineers are trained to solve problems. And a lot of I know from our perspective, from environmental, not many people see environmental folk as problem solvers. So when we introduced that concept to the airport, we became more of a valuable resource to the organization, because we had the ability to look outside of our business and find out creative ways of solving problems that brought value to the airport. And when we speak about technology, our industry is very focused on safety and efficiency. And when you have that, you want to do things that are very well known. And so technology is that big, scary thing. But fortunately, we have our innovation team and others who are very focused on introducing new technologies in ways that kind of demystify some of the scary attributes of those technologies and show them how they can actually transform the way that we solve problems or make decisions today.
Excellent. Well, I think that's a great note to end on. Thank you, Robert. Thank you, Lynette, for joining us. This was very informative. You guys have a lot of overlap and parallels in your careers, so I think this worked out really nicely. Yeah. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.